Hello, Read 581, and welcome to week 14. This is very likely going to be my last lecture of the semester. Hooray, we did it, we made it. Before we jump into our content for the week, just some reminders about key logistics. So you have one chapter to read only, and it is a quick 20 pages. It is chapter 14, which is on English language learners and other learners with special needs. I'll highlight a few things in this lecture, but I don't know how much new information is here. Not as much practical information as some of the past chapters either, unfortunately, but worth a look at for sure. All right, assignments due this week. You should be doing student intervention session number 2 and wrapping up any remaining sessions. So the focus on these final sessions are two things. First, to do any post assessments that need to get done. So if you have a goal on fluency, comprehension, likely you do, make sure you give the QRI so you're comparing that to the initial assessments. If you did some additional assessments at the onset, maybe in vocabulary or in other things, and then realized, or phonemic awareness, and maybe you realized by doing those initial assessments that that was not a need of your student and you didn't target it in your intervention program, you do not need to go back and give those assessments, nor do you need to include them in your final report. In your final progress report, you just look at the pre-assessment results for your focus areas and then provide the post-assessment results. So, student intervention session number 10, giving assessments and also celebrating. Your student, as well as you, have worked very hard, and I'm sure you've learned a lot of lessons about intervention, what works and what doesn't from them. So please celebrate them and recognize the hard work they've put in for you. If you want to make them a little certificate or get them a book or a bookmark or something to, continue to motivate them to, develop and continue these great habits you've been working on building with them, please take time to do that this week. Other assignments to do, video reflection number 2. It is different than video reflection 1, so please make sure you consult the correct directions and template for that. And then optional, if you would like to submit whippers for sessions 9 and 10, you may do that. I would rather you spend the time actually putting that information in your final progress report, as that information will be needed for that as well. So it's kind of redundant to do whippers for session 10, as that's what's going to be in your final assessment report, which is why I decided to make it optional in the first place. But it's on the syllabus, so if you want to submit it, you may. And then lastly, work on the final report and your caregiver letter. Those are our last assignments, which are due Tuesday, December 12th by 11:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. No exceptions. I have a pretty quick turnaround to get in scores and grades and whatnot. So please get those in by Tuesday so I can get them graded promptly and you can know your final grade for the semester. All right, with that, let me highlight a couple things from the chapter. As you know, wrapping up this course, we really are addressing all of these objectives, specifically now with our communication skills as we present formal case reports and less, formal reports going to the parent and caregiver. But give yourself a pat on the back because we've been very highly focused on all 6 of these objectives this semester. All right, so chapter 14 reminds you that within a classroom, you're going to see students who speak standard English, students who speak non-standard English, which you can read about on pages 530 and 531. So they might have, some sort of regional dialect, tomato, where they pronounce things a little bit differently. So more of an accent or phonological variation. There may be, grammatical variation where they kind of use morphological units differently. So they may use archaic language forms, versus more modern English. Both of those seem to be more socially acceptable than, less standard English forms. So talk about that on pages 530 and 531, and all of the, strategies and information provided are going to help you with the non-standard English learners as well. They talk about your English language learners, some of whom, are bilingual, so they have some understanding of English already, and then some who do not speak English at all. So, as a reminder, within a classroom of English language learners, they're going to be different languages represented, which presents a challenge. But then even within the same language, for instance, English language learners who are Latino, they could be, there's diversity within that Latino speaking population in regard to place of origin and in terms of Spanish language use, culture, and economic status. So, you can't categorize them just because of the language they speak. And within that language, they have different proficiency levels with their language, their home language, as well as with English. So lots of things to take into consideration when you are providing instruction for English language learners. And it looks like my slide is getting cut off here. So hold on, let me adjust that. All right, hopefully that's better. You can see the bottom of my screen now. Well, now there's some, opinions out there as to what is the most effective type of ELL instruction in regard to, are we doing a transitional bilingual program, an immersion program, a structured immersion program, or a two-way bilingual program? You can read all about those on page 526. But those arguments aside, one thing that is inarguable is the importance of oral language development. And on page 523, they have a nice table that gives you all of the relevant research supporting the need for oral language development because of, oral language being such a major building block for literacy. And one statistic I, was not completely familiar with is that an English language learner must have oral knowledge of 95% of the English vocabulary words in a text to read it with some understanding. So, that just goes to show you the importance of oral language. If they don't understand 95% of the oral language in that passage, they're not going to understand it, okay? So, they talk about a lot of different ways and approaches. One such being, they bring up the 4 blocks instruction, actually, that we read about in 585, Cunningham, who did the different 4 blocks, which are guided reading, independent reading, word work, and writing. But they recommend adding a 5th block focused on oral language development. And then on page 524, they give you a list of all these different ways that you can develop oral language as a classroom teacher. So things like what I've summed up as making content comprehensible, but basically that's using objects and pictures and realia to teach nouns and vocabulary terms, using pantomime and role playing, to teach action words, including puppets, video, computer software. So just any additional visuals or motions, drama, etc., to make whatever it is you're teaching more comprehensible to your language learners. Planning for daily discussions, the more practice they get, not only with listening comprehension, listening, understanding, speaking, etc., the better. Really using good books as springboards for oral language. Considering special language concerns, so idioms, your nose is running, or you smell like a rose, things like that, don't directly translate and are confusing, as well as homonyms that sound the same, but have completely different meanings, like the number 2 and 2 in addition to, or whole, in the ground versus a whole as being, in one large entity. So making sure that you're considering some of those special language things, being mindful of academic language when you're using it, the demands of it, helping them navigate it, really having them create and produce things, always encouraging correct usage because we don't want them to be disadvantaged academically or when out in the workforce. On page 527, they give you special considerations for new English language learners. So thinking about things how they may mispronounce words, although they do have an understanding of what that word means and can comprehend it. How they pronounce it might be different based on their home language. And so you can teach the sound variations, but, teaching that or the pronunciation differences really has little importance to the understanding of what is read. Another thing to take into consideration is that the level of English language proficiency is going to determine your materials and approaches as well. So you can't just lump all English learners into one category and teach them all with the same materials because they're going to have different background knowledge and experience and levels of proficiency. They also talk about utilizing things like cognates. Many of the words we have in our language are borrowed from the Romance languages, so there's a lot of overlap there between certain words. So you can draw on that as a tool. And then also being really mindful about prior knowledge. And one thing I thought was a good idea is they mentioned several times taking a two-pronged approach to addressing variations in prior knowledge. So on the one side, you are really taking advantage of the rich experiences students bring from their home countries. So selecting culturally relevant themes in your stories, using multicultural literature and text, having them share traditions and things important to them. So utilizing their cultural experience and background, but then at the same time building new background knowledge that they might not have based on an English reading experience so that they're not disadvantaged by not having that understanding of things that are different culturally from, what they're used to. So have the two-pronged approach, which was also mentioned on page 524. Don't treat students as linguistic incompetents and don't take a deficit perspective, but instead recognize that they are fully competent speakers of a different language and have a different culture and utilize that to your benefit. A couple of odds and ends from the chapter. On page 533, they talk about ways that, in the classroom, you might be able to better support at-risk pupils who may not have, as much exposure to books and, print and language experiences in the home. So, in your classroom, making available high-interest books, structuring your programs so that there's independent activity and free time where they can read to compensate for maybe not getting the reading experience at home, setting up learning centers so they have a listening station and have the opportunity to listen or be read to, reading aloud to your students as much as possible, sending books home, taking them to the school library if you have one, etc. So honestly, these are just good practices in general for motivating readers and creating, culture focused on reading. So I would check those out. They also talk about the Success for All program on page 535, which has been used successfully as an intervention in inner city schools with high-risk students. And it consists of regular classroom reading instruction that's somewhat homogeneous with 15 children for 90 minutes. And then the second part of the program is one-on-one tutoring for the bottom 25% of students in their classes. So I would check that out because I think it's just kind of a good intervention model to begin with. They talk about every 8 weeks monitoring student progress, utilizing parental involvement as well. So something worth checking out. And then lastly, the chapter also includes other learners with special needs. So they talk about older youth and adults who might be illiterate or are functionally illiterate. So, and then they also provide suggestions for, working with them. So that's all I have to tell you about this chapter as we wrap up the course. And since this is very well my last lecture, everything else will probably just be given to you in checklist form since we just have one more week and it's going to be a list of everything you have due to me. I thought I would share some closing thoughts and quotes with you. So the first two are kind of similar, but I can't resist a good quote from Kid President. This one says, "They may forget what you said, but they will not forget how you made them feel." And I think that in reading through your whippers and in having conversations with you, I can tell that you all have been very concerned about the atmosphere and the environment that you are creating and really making your students motivated to read and to enjoy the process of reading so that they're not feeling frustrated or unsuccessful. And you've seen a lot of progress, and I think your students will not forget you and how you made them feel in this special 10 weeks of intervention you've given them. And then the next quote, "Be somebody who makes everybody feel like a somebody." I've also seen this happening with a lot of you in the work with your students, like really building them up and affirming them and making them believe that they are a reader and that they can be a strong reader. And then lastly, from Todd Whitaker, "The best thing about being a teacher is that it matters. The hardest thing about being a teacher is that it matters every day." So I just want to commend you on taking, this responsibility so seriously. Here in 581, you're sitting down with, an actual little person who really feeds on and takes note of everything you say. And I know that you guys have taken this role very seriously. You've been very committed to planning the best sessions possible. And I know you're very committed to getting the most results that you possibly can with your student. I know many of you are continuing to work with your student or think of ways that they can continue practicing the work you've done so that they, maintain those skills and can continue to build those good habits into their reading practice. So anyways, give yourself a pat on the back. You guys have come a long way, both as practitioners, as, reflective practitioners, as well as interventionists. I hope you've learned some things this semester about how to intervene and how to target, specific needs within your learners. So I'm excited to read these final assignments and to see all the growth that has happened. Even if they haven't grown, 2 reading levels in 10 weeks, which is phenomenal, but not likely, there have been small changes like them self-correcting more or recognizing when they don't understand something or using a strategy or not looking to you to give them the words. So there has been huge growth happening, and it's been a pleasure for me to observe and stand by and watch you and hopefully support you somewhat in this journey. So just 2 weeks to go. You can do it. Got a few more assignments, and then it's graduation time for you all. I will hopefully see you in May. All right. Have a great week.